Hey everyone, and welcome to the Church at Denver podcast. We're really glad you're here with us. At Church at Denver, we are a community of believers in Denver, North Carolina that exists to know Christ intimately and make him known authentically. Our greatest hope is to see you captivated by the beauty and truth of the gospel. Through Christ-centered teaching, Christ-exalting worship, Christ-saturated community, and Christ-commanded multiplication, we're committed to following the way of Jesus and reaching others as he's called us to. Today's episode is a special one. Instead of a message from our Sunday morning worship gathering, we're bringing you insights from a recent mission trip we took to Jordan. You'll hear from the men in our church who went on this trip as they share about what they saw, learned, and how God is moving in that part of the world. We pray that these stories encourage you, strengthen you, and expand your vision for what it means to follow Jesus wherever he leads. If you'd like to learn more about our church, get connected, or see what's happening in our community, you can visit us at churchatdenver.org or click the link in the episode's description. Thanks again for listening and being a part of our online family. All right, let's get back to the podcast. All right, guys, I am here with the guys from the Jordan trip today. Guys, thank you for being here and for coming to tell us about your trip. George, I'll start with you because you lived in Jordan for 6.5 years, right? Can you just give us sort of a picture of what it looks like to be a Christian over in Jordan?
Yeah, thanks. The privilege and blessing to be able to live there and engage with the culture we still reflect on today. It's a wonderful experience, and God taught us and showed us a lot of things during that time frame. We made lots of good friends, and one thing you learn right away is the hospitality factor of the people in Jordan is off the charts. They love you, they care about you, they engage with you. And another thing that really surprised us and really was amazing is they love speaking about spiritual issues. It's not something they shy away from like they do in our country, but it's some way that we were able to connect with them on a real personal, spiritual level. They love to know that we are followers of Jesus. That's not an issue to be afraid of. In fact, we should not be afraid of them at all. And I know in our country, people are afraid of Muslims, and we were very fortunate to build some very, very good relationships with people and understand where they're coming from and the issues and challenges of life that they have. And so the people, obviously, there's a very, very small church in Jordan. Less than 1% of the population makes up the body of followers of Jesus in this land. And they do have some freedoms, but it's still a 99-point-something% majority Muslim community. And it's so hard for them to really be impactful for the kingdom. And candidly, we sensed like the Western church is not really supporting or encouraging and coming alongside the church of that part of the world. And we would love to see more engagement from our people in this country to help the church there to grow and be the church that God wants it to be in that area. Now, they do have limited freedom. They are a minority, but they are able to worship. And there are really two churches in this land, the above-ground formal church of recognized denominations, and then the very fast-growing church of Muslim background believers that we're really excited to see what God is doing. And actually through the issue of dreams and visions, many people are learning about Jesus and coming to Jesus. So we're very excited to partner with these people and help them in their discipleship journey become more fully devoted followers of Jesus. But we just love living there, and I just wish people had the opportunity to live there or spend some time there and see this is truly the Holy Land. This is the land where the Exodus occurred. This is the land where Elijah was, where John the Baptist was, where Jesus walked. And so we were able to live out an area of the world where the Bible came to life. And I think if you have that perspective, it makes you feel more valued by what Jesus did on the cross for us. And so I think this all comes together for us to be more intentional, I think, with our faith in this part of the world and not be afraid of sharing our witness, even though technically it's illegal against the law to proselytize. But we've learned that for the sake of the gospel, it's worth getting kicked out of the country for. It's worth taking the risk to share the gospel because it's so powerful. And we were so pleased to see so many Muslim friends of ours willing to engage in conversation, and some ask great questions and start wondering why they believe what they believe, and that's all we can do. We can't make it happen. The Holy Spirit does the work. We just are the ones who bring salt and light to that community.
George, I'm sure that the story of you getting into missionary work in the Middle East has been a crazy one, where God did a lot. But can you talk about why you got into this work?
Good question. The bottom line for me is once I said yes to Jesus, that I wanted to follow him wherever he would take me. That led me on obviously a testimony journey that we all have one way or another, but eventually led me to realize that in the Middle East especially, the church is at risk of disappearing. There's a risk that the church will cease to exist, and my heart said, we can't let this happen. We have to do whatever God allows us to do in his power, in the power of the Holy Spirit, to be able to be engaged in ways to support, encourage, and pray for the church, and to help them be the witness in this part of the world, where the way it looks, for example, Bethlehem, 85% Christian 40 years ago, 85% Muslim today, surrounded by settlements of Israeli settlers. Soon, the way it's going now, could be disappearing from the face of the earth in 15 years. That breaks my heart. And I don't want to sit here and say I didn't do everything in my power that God has gifted me to do and allow this to happen without being able to be there and a witness for Jesus.
You talked about how a lot of people have misconceptions about Muslims. What might those be, and what's wrong about them?
I think we have a misperception that they're all terrorists. And true, there are terrorist factions within the Muslim community, but it's just like the fundamental Christian community that we have fanatics on our side of the spectrum as well. And it's a very, very small percentage. In fact, many Muslims are being turned off to Islam today because of these fanatics. And more people are becoming atheists out of Islam than they are going to be fanatical Muslim followers. And so the reality is they're just like us. There's no difference. Some are secular Muslims, some are strong Muslims. There's a very small percentage of fanatical Muslims, I would say, extremists. But I think the ones who are truly seeking Allah are the ones that we'd like to connect with, because they are in a spiritual search. And when they spend Ramadan, 30 days of fasting and praying, many people do see Jesus and find Jesus. So we want to stay alongside them on this journey and be there when they have that dream or that vision or that aha moment where we can actually help usher them into the kingdom of God.
I love that. Like when the word says, you will search, or you will find me when you search for me with your whole heart. And those during Ramadan especially who are searching with their whole heart, we can expect that they would find Jesus. So that's beautiful. Matt, I'll toss it over to you. As a lead pastor of Church at Denver, you're thinking about a lot of things from a macro level of discipleship at church. Why did you choose to take some of the guys from our church on this trip specifically?
So as a church, this is a very exciting time for us. We are seeing a lot of growth. We are getting ready to move into a building, and we could rest on the success that we're seeing here at home as a church, but the reality is that's not the Great Commission. And we are called to take the gospel to Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And the heartbeat of our church is to want to become more missional, to be active in the work of missions, to be supporting missionaries, to be praying for missionaries. And that process has to be modeled for the church. And our missions team began a discussion about how can we launch this initiative to become more missional. And we evaluated different parts of the world and where we felt led of the Lord to go. And Jordan was a place that had little involvement from outside supporters. It was a place that had great need. It was a place where the gospel was beginning to build. It's a place in the Middle East that if you circle a 100-mile radius, it hits just about everywhere of significance. And if the gospel can just catch fire in this region, it could change the Middle East for the good, for the gospel. And we understood that going there through George's connections and we had an opportunity to learn what God was doing there, but even more so learn how we can come alongside of their church and support them in their effort to make Christ known. And so this was a great opportunity for us to show our church family the dedication of being missional and showing and modeling for them how they too can be a part of this missions effort. And especially in a place that George talked about where we may not feel like we want to love them. We may feel threatened by them. We may feel that they are against us. But if you spend any time there, you'll learn that the people there have a love for others, a respect and an appreciation, and very much like us in many ways. And by being there, our heart for them grew to ensure that they understood and fell in love with the gospel. And so we pray that as a church that these wonderful men that we got to go on this journey with, I pray that we all have come back with a changed perspective and an opportunity to tell our story on our journey to inspire others to engage in this work, so that we as a church can be more missionally minded, that we can support these missionaries, that we can raise up missionaries, and that we can actively engage in the Great Commission.
Our mission at the church is to know Christ and to make Christ known. And we focus so much on the know Christ part. I love that we are enabling our church to see how we can make him known, and not just here, but around the world. I heard someone say one time, the light that shines the farthest shines the brightest at home. And so I love that we are actively doing that to show our church what that looks like. Steve, I'll pass it over to you because Matt really talked about that discipleship component of it, and I know that you are pursuing advanced studies in discipleship. So you probably approach this trip with a really unique perspective based on what you're learning. So what did you learn about the process of discipleship in Jordan?
So thanks for the question. When we first went over there, I was really at that point of looking at what is discipleship? What is my role in discipleship? What is our role as Christians and as a church in discipleship? And so it's kind of just beginning that walk, really. And but while we were there, one of the things that really spoke to me was some of the discipleship ministry that we saw. So one of the folks that we talked to was a brother, Safa, who's from Menara Ministries in Jordan. And his family has long been involved in ministry there. And one of the things they do is run a camp. It's called Camp Gilead. And they run it in Gilead, which is in northern Jordan, which I thought was just kind of cool that, it's actually Camp Gilead in Gilead. But their focus really is on taking young people, teens, 20-year-old, people in their early 20s, these, the future, from various local churches, bring them into the camp during the summertime. And, just like camps here, really focus on getting them to know Christ, whether that's and through different types of ministries, music and games and drama and things like that. But along the way, they're really introducing a lot of these kids to Jesus, and those kids will come back again and again and again and continually be growing in their faith and in their walk. And as part of that, they have a follow-up. I believe now I can't remember the name of the follow-up ministry, but they have a follow-up ministry where they're continuing to work with these young people in their local churches throughout the year. So the idea is they're focusing on this future of the church in Jordan, in the local churches in Jordan, which, as George said, it's a small population. And it could be very easy for that population to just disappear. So by focusing on this young group of people in these various local churches, they're continuing to build the church into the future. And we actually saw that in that one of the other ministries we visited. We spoke with a young woman who is on staff at this church, and they're very focused on supporting the Iraqi Christian refugees that have had to flee northern Iraq. And this church does a lot for those Iraqi Christians. And the person really responsible for it is this young woman who came up through that ministry. She went to camp, she was discipled through the programs, and now she's working in a ministry and really being the hands and feet of Jesus to reach out to people who need that support right now. And so when I look at that, it's like, okay, that's something that's really important that they take very seriously, is being able to reach out to this population, spend the time and the effort to disciple them so that they can then turn around and make disciples going forward.
Wow, there's that like multiplication aspect of it. What, like, you know, we do some of those things here. We try to engage young people in their faith and do that kind of stuff. What would you say is like what some of the key differences between stuff you see in the States or even in our own church as opposed to what you saw in Jordan happening?
Yeah. So what I see in the States, and it's not as much in our church. I think our church is pretty good, but again, we're still growing in a lot of areas. And I know we have plans as we move into the building and things like that. So, I think, you know, we make that one of our priorities, one of our areas is discipleship, which is good. But what we see mostly, it seems like in the American church, the evangelical church, is we have that kind of mile wide, foot deep kind of approach where it's really about getting people into the church, getting them saved, you know, and they know Jesus, and then that tends to be good enough. We have a lot of churches, a lot of Christians that are saved and can talk about the cross, and that's pretty much it. And they live their lives as they're still in the world. And I think from our perspective, you know, a disciple is somebody who is following Jesus, who has made that commitment to follow and be like Jesus, and then help other people to do the same thing. And so I think here in the U.S., and one of the things I look forward to here at this church is doing that thing. We've got a lot of good, faithful people here who aren't just satisfied with resting on their faith, who are actively serving and actively looking for opportunities to make a difference for Jesus in the culture and in Denver and in this area. And I think that's, you know, what we need. We need to move from a shallow, ineffective walk with Jesus. You know, we're Christians, we're part of a church too. We are missionaries, we are ambassadors, and we're disciples and disciple makers. And I think that's kind of what I saw there that really affected me, is these are people they're less than 1% of the population. And yet they have this commitment to grow and to be Jesus to the Muslim community around them and to influence those people. And that's what I would like to see more here, not just at Church of Denver, but in our American church, is those people who take it seriously enough to commit to it, to die to themselves every day, take up their cross and follow Jesus, and to pass on to other people those things that they've learned. So to be disciples and disciple makers.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with the inch deep, mile wide. Like that can be so us sometimes. We can be incredibly shallow. We get satisfied with just knowing the right ideas, but not seeing the right experience. And like what you saw in Jordan is like these kids, they come and they experience God and they know Him, and then they keep coming back, and there's intentional follow up and there's intentional discipleship. So I love what you were talking about. You know, now that for those listening, there was 2 Steves on this trip, so we're tossing it over to the other Steve now. So Steve, now I understand that you were wrestling with the decision to go on this trip in the first place. Can you talk us through how God encouraged you to go?
Well, when I started, the church mission team decided in April that we were going to take a trip to Jordan, and I signed up early on, and the deal was that George was going to take a van and have 5 other guys in the van with him, so we had room for 6. And Pastor Matt was 1 and George was 2, so there were 4 more people. And so I signed up right away and said I was willing to go, and I kept waiting for 7, 8, 9, 10 people in the church wanting to go so I could graciously bow out, and that never materialized. And so I'm more of a sender and prayer guy. I'm not a goer often. I've gone on some mission trips, but I'm normally lets other people do that. But so we kept going, and there were 6, and then we dropped to 5, and then we got back to 6 again, but we never exceeded 6 people. So I knew God I guess I kind of realized God wanted me to go. And I kept saying that the Jordanian people need Jesus too. I don't know what that looks like because I've never been there, but I know they need Jesus just like other countries do. And so my wife was not quite at peace about this thing, and the bombs were going off and craziness was happening in the fall. And so I looked up the State Department. I looked up their status on Jordan, and it said that the risk level didn't change at all the whole year. It was still a good country to go to. And once I got that, my wife said, well, I'm at peace about it. It was all like an instant switch turned on. I was at peace about it as well. And so we just decided I would take the trip. And the other thing that got to me is George is leading the trip. My dear friend, Pastor Matt's going, and I could encourage those two guys to lead the team and get to make it a great trip if I did nothing else.
That's awesome. I love that you said, like, I'm more of a prayer than a goer, right? And then God is still like shifting you and moving you into that direction. So I think that's awesome. And obviously, thank you for your obedience in that, because, you know, going to another country and experiencing a totally different culture like that on a missions trip can be really daunting. So coming home, what's changed for you? Like, do you have more confidence about your role here, about God's work there? Talk to me about how you feel coming home.
Well, one of the things I really observed is the big thing is coffee shops. Where we stayed, there were about 7 or 8 coffee shops within a 2 or 3 minute walking distance. And the people there are very social. They're very connected. They like to talk to people. And one of the strategies of reaching people is to get to know them, get to love on them, and then have those coffee shop discussions and get to know them and have an opportunity to share Jesus, even though it's not legal. But once you have a discussion and you get to know somebody, and if you can ask them, can I share my faith with you? And they say yes, then you're allowed to do it. So there's ways to do that, but it's more of a one-on-one connection with people. And I realize that that's something that I need to do more of here. There's more and more coffee shops in Denver, as we see, and there's more opportunities to have those one-on-ones. And I don't need to go to Jordan to have to meet with people and evangelize people here. And it's really hard work there. It's allowed to do here. So what excuse do I have? Those people are working really hard, and they're evangelizing. And in some cases, it's really hard, tedious work. And they do lots of different things to meet these people. And then the last part, the last day we got a chance to meet a group of a whole family of Muslims, and they invited us into our home, and they were so gracious to us. So they loved on us even though they didn't even know us. Mm-hmm. So.
The hospitality aspect being over there, I'm sure, was incredible to experience. I love what you said about, like, you know, they just go, there's like 7 coffee shops within walking distance, and they just go and have coffee. And like, we don't need to overcomplicate parts of this. Like, you know, just go get coffee with someone and ask them about their life and get to know them. So anyway, and for anyone listening, if Steve asks you out for coffee, you know why. And if any new coffee shops pop up in Denver, maybe they started in this room. So Jerry, I'll toss it over to you. You know, during this trip, I heard that the statement "lean into conflict" really resonated with you. Can you share why that stood out so strongly?
Well, thanks for the question. That is a real question to face, especially when you're going to the Middle East. And like Steve mentioned, there were oppositions to us going, as far as even in our own families, with the concern about us going into an area where there is conflict. And the Middle East has been, full with conflict over the years. And most recently, after October 7th of last year, some of the tension that has been exhibited there. And what I learned from that, and why I grabbed hold of that statement, lean into conflict, not that we make conflict, not that we are the agitators, but we should be leaning into conflict because God is at work. And when God is at work, He is showing Himself. And many times we doubt God's activity in our lives. We don't realize what God is doing around us. And when I went to Jordan, I saw how God was using situations. God was able to take the situation of refugees from Iraq to bring them to Jordan. These people were targeted by ISIS. They had to flee their homes or else they'd be annihilated. They came to Jordan under the UN protection, but they are only visitors in Jordan. They cannot have jobs. The education is limited for them. They are very limited. But what is God doing in those Christians that had to flee Iraq? What he's doing is he's putting them in there in a temporary situation where they now have to find where are they going to go after Jordan because they can't work in Jordan. Where do they go? Do they go to England? Do they go to Canada? Do they go to the United States, Australia, New Zealand? These are the countries that are open to them. If we devote time and energy into these refugees, they become missionaries from that location to other places like Australia, missionaries to the United States, spreading the gospel in the United States. So looking, that phrase, lean into conflict, is basically what I'm saying is, as men and women of peace, we need to be looking to where God is at work. And we need to be joining him where he is at work. I was totally blessed by seeing the Iraqi refugees and the love of Christ in those people's radiance. Yes, were under tough situations, but God is at work. And the same way in Syria with the camps, we got reports that the requests for camps were skyrocketing in Syria because of the conflict in Syria. And, many times when we get the news in our country, it's filtered. We don't hear everything. And we'd like to think that we have an open press. But in reality, we get what is intended for us to hear. And so going to Jordan and seeing how God is at work, never feel like you're alone. I think that's the message is you lean into conflict, realize that God is at work. He hasn't abandoned you. And what God is doing is he wants others to accept his son and increase the kingdom. And what can we do with just a small portion of talents that we have? One of the other things too, and as Steve mentioned, the first Steve mentioned about just being intentional in your discipleship, and as Steve G mentioned, the coffee houses. I think it's being intentional with people and meeting people where they are. It is that intentional attitude of, I want to get to know you. We put our shoes on the same way. We're faced with a lot of the same conflicts, or we're faced with a lot of the same problems. We have a lot in common. The one thing we don't have in common yet is our Savior. And how do we share the knowledge? So the second thing I learned when I was in Jordan was always be prepared to have an answer. Because if you are prepared to have an answer, when somebody asks you about the hope that is within you, why is my identity in Christ? Then I can say, this is why Jesus Christ is my identity. It's knowing Christ and making him known and being intentional about sharing the gospel.
I think sometimes like that lean into conflict piece is so critical because it's an invitation to see where God is at work. Absolutely. And I think the conflict doesn't always have to be war or poverty or like some crazy thing, like some of the things that you guys I'm sure experienced and saw there. The conflict could just be, I'm a socially awkward person and I don't want to invite someone to a coffee shop, right? There's conflict within me. And so like your invitation, lean into that conflict, regardless of how big the conflict is. God's at work there.
Absolutely. You said it better than I could say it. And the thing is that, around us, even in Denver, North Carolina, that the Denver of the East. Okay.
Yes.
That's a starting conversation right there. But, in our own community, there are men and women that have needs, and there are personal conflicts that people are facing every day. Are we willing to share the hope that lives within us and being intentional in that person's life?
So good. So good. Alex, I'm going to toss it over to you because this is not your first mission trip you've been on. You've gone on several mission trips, but Jordan was a very unique experience, I understand, for you. You got into this a little bit later than the rest of them, so you didn't have as much emotional time to prepare for this. What did you learn, and what did you learn there, and why was this mission trip different for you?
Thank you. Yeah, I think I joined about a month before, and maybe that was a good thing. I didn't have time to think through a lot of it and worry about it much, or my wife to worry about it. But no, thankfully, obviously, she's always very supportive of that. And just, I think the theme is seeing the commonalities, and this is what I see a lot. Often going to places, the opportunities that I had, thankfully, before. One of the things I see is it's kind of an expression. It might be cliche, but it's all different, but it's all the same. Ultimately, we're all, as human beings, right? We have the same hurts sometimes, the same anxieties, the same needs as well. And it's amazing to see God working in a place like Jordan that I had never been to before. And culturally, for me, again, I wasn't fully prepared to, and engage in a way, but somewhat knowledgeable about it, in the Middle East especially, right? But just seeing how God is also working in the same ways, in a way. It's church, God's church, expressing how God reaches out in both discipleship, in both growth, locally, that missional desire for, followers of Christ to not just, find a community, but also that community creates and nurtures that going attitude, because we're finding and we're living with the most valuable, the best thing we could ever find in our lifetimes ever, the treasure that is Christ, and it's meant to generate that desire to go. So seeing the church in in a universal church, God's church, expressing those healthy signs, both reaching the hurt, reaching in the communities that we visited there, and concern for the discipleship, concern for the growth of the church, concern for the future generations. One of the first figures that I remember hearing was that about 70% of Jordan population is under 35 years old.
Wow.
Very young. And there's a need there, not just to make sure that they hear and they're exposed to this, but also there's a need for the discipleship, a good, grounded and foundational and healthy and strong discipleship, very theologically sound and all of that. But that's a huge need for, even though it's a small footprint right now, we know that God is working out all of this so that, in future generations, as it is even happening now, there's missional work happening from Jordan to other countries, to other groups of people around the world, which is happening as we speak. And we witness that. So to me, it's just an honor to see that, to go places in Latin America and see the same thing, see the God's church growing and extending and helping the hurt, helping in outreach, because they feel and they know, and it's God working through their hearts and just carrying out what it's intended to do.
I don't think I realized that so much of the church, you said 70% of the church is around what age?
35, under 35.
Under 35.
Yep.
Is that common? Like, you've been on other mission trips. Is that pretty common now around the world?
Well, not. I think it's more of a Middle East, and that has to do with life expectancy as well, right? Okay. So health and lots of conditions there where people definitely, and there's birth rates and all of that stuff. But I'm not sure the exact few years in other countries and regions, but it's I think this is a significant one.
Yeah.
It really stood out.
It's unique in some way. Yeah. For those who maybe aren't super familiar with all of that, why does it matter that so much of the church is so young?
It just creates, the opportunity for us to bridge, because there isn't an extended, a large footprint of a church in Jordan, and it creates God is bringing people in the opportunities that we had now, and there's others in this country. There's other churches in Asia that are going there. So God, I think, is merging us all in there, because there is this amazing, population, and that is ripe in a way. They're full of questions, right? They're full of anxiety as well, because of what the world represents right now to them, what they believe. Culturally, obviously they have a very solid and strong beliefs already, but there's always that opportunity. This is the age, this is the time and the place for God to bring people where they can ask somebody a question. Why do you believe different? And then for us, being able to be there, have that opportunity to share that.
Yeah, it's the future of the church. Yeah. Is like it's actually happening, and to see such a large percentage of the church be part of the church of the future is I'm incredibly encouraging. Matt, I'll toss it back to you, because I'm sure this is something that you think about as well. Looking at the church and the demographic of the church in the United States and the church that you're pastoring. You're thinking about the health of the church and all that kind of stuff. But for you, what are the ways that our church could practically engage in the mission of Jordan?
I think, like we've talked about, like Alex shared and you did, the church is the bride of Christ. It's the mean by which God wants to build his kingdom. And I believe a strong local church is a strong presence of the gospel in the community. And what we identified over in Jordan was a church that we really wanted to come alongside of their pastor, support that local church, and be able to bring encouragement to the pastor, to their congregation, to help them to reach their community with the gospel. As a pastor to another pastor, I think about, ministry is hard, whether you do it vocationally or whether you do it just voluntarily. And there's times of discouragement, there's times of frustration. And, I was very humbled by the pastor that we got to spend some time with on several occasions while we were over there, just seeing the perseverance, pastoring in a very difficult country, in a difficult place with hard soil, but his just tenacity, his perseverance and resilience and dedication, and just love for his congregation and his love for the gospel and for the people of Jordan. And to be able to have an opportunity, a small church like ours, thousands of miles away, to be able to support them financially, to support them through prayer, to support them through just sending more people in the future, to help them reach their community, to believe in the power of the gospel, to give them hope that God is in the business of saving and that he can use this local church to do so. So I'm excited for our church to be able to partner with this local church in this area, to be able to help them to do what God's called them to do and commissioned them to do.
Wow. You mentioned like meeting some of the other pastors there. Did they change your sort of dynamic and framework for pastoring as you came back home?
I mean, honestly, it made me thankful for our church in more ways than imaginable. I think, some of the things that we get frustrated with, they would dream of, they would desire. I'm lucky to pastor a wonderful church congregation in the Bible Belt, where people want to come to church and be at church. And they are working against a community that in some ways resists the church. And for me, it was just kind of like what Steve shared earlier about, the obstacles that they face in advancing the gospel. God has stripped those away here. And now the danger in that is complacency. But the challenge and the conviction of the heart is with these freedoms comes great responsibility. And that's just the humble reminder that as a pastor and leader, we've got to lead by example, model what we preach, and just really encourage others to engage in this missional work while we still have this great opportunity in this great country.
Oh, that's so good. George, I'll toss it back to you. Just could you give us any closing thoughts, anything you want to say based on what you've heard today?
Yeah, thanks for giving me this opportunity. When we were living in Jordan, people would often ask us why we were there. And as Americans, they were thinking, why would you leave the wonderful country you live in to come live in this hard place, 40% unemployment, very, very difficult place to live? And we were able to answer honestly that we prayed about every decision we make, and God led us, answered our prayer, and said, I want you to live here and love these people. And that kind of blew their minds, first of all. But secondly, we were excited about that because it gave us a chance to build relationships. Eventually, we would pray with and for these people, which is really exciting to be part of that process, their discipleship process. But the sad part is we heard also after we'd say that we were the first Christians they ever met. And that saddened us because it takes 7 to 9 years for a Muslim to come to faith after the first Christian they meet. That's heartbreaking. So, you talk about why we're there. We were there to be witnesses for Jesus, and we need more witnesses for Jesus. And the verse that I always reflect on is from Revelation 7:9. It says, after this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes and palm branches in their hands. So I'm thinking, wouldn't it be cool to see some of the fruit of this community of Arabs up there? And what can our church do to help move this population to be more Arab as well as other nationalities? But we have to start somewhere. And the second largest belief system in the world is the Muslim belief system. And so what can we do to help move the needle in helping this community look this way when we get to heaven? And we can maybe rub shoulders with people that we had an impact with, that we get to touch. He allowed us the opportunity to do life and pray with these people. I have no idea where people are spiritually that we did life with right now. Hopefully we'll see them in heaven someday. And I think that's the vision of the church, to move people from here to there. The saying of our purpose statement of our organization is that we're convinced that no one should live and die without hearing about the good news of Jesus Christ. And I think that's our heart. We want to see that happen. And so whether you pray for these things, or you give to these things, or if you're one of the goers, I think we have to be engaged. All of us as followers of Jesus need to be engaged in one of these three aspects.
If evangelism is such an important part of our faith, and I love what you said about that. Like, you don't want to see a single person die without ever having the gospel shared with them. And I think for all of us, especially listeners to this podcast, like if the Lord came back today and he looked at you and said, what reason did you have for not sharing your faith? I think all of our reasons that we would use today would just fall flat. They wouldn't feel convincing enough. I was busy, I was tired, I was intimidated, I didn't lean into conflict, I didn't want to go to the coffee shop. All those reasons would just not suffice. And so, what you guys experienced in Jordan, I know will stick with you for a long time. And I just want to thank you guys for coming today and sharing with our church about your experience. And I'd encourage you guys who are listening to invite these guys out to coffee, to ask them more about the trip, to catch on to this heart, because really what God is doing in the Middle East, like these guys have said, is a catalyst for change around the world. And so we're just excited to be a part of this mission. And guys, thank you again for coming and talking to us today. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Church at Denver podcast. We hope that you were encouraged and inspired by the stories and insights shared about the mission trip to Jordan. It's amazing to see how God is at work all around the world and how he's inviting us to be a part of his mission. This episode was just a little taste of what these men experienced, and so we encourage you to reach out to them, take them out for coffee, and hear more about what God showed them on this trip. Their stories and experiences can inspire all of us to step out in faith and see how God might be calling us to engage in his work. Also, be on the lookout for any additional events associated with this trip where the guys might be able to share more of the stories. If you'd like to learn more about our church, explore opportunities to get involved, or stay updated on what's happening in our community, you can visit us at churchatdenver.org or click the link in the episode's description. As always, we're really grateful for the opportunity to share this time with you. If this episode spoke to you today, feel free to share it with a friend or leave a review to help others connect and find us. Thanks again for joining us. We love you, church, and we're praying for you. Have a great week.